Couple of days ago, the Babylon Bee posted this tweet. Man gravely abandons unpopular Christian belief to affirm extremely popular cultural belief. The Babylon Bee aspires to be a satire website. Now, satire being a literary genre that aims to deliver social critique by way of irony, exaggeration, humor, and or ridicule. In this case, the goal appears to be the use of irony and ridicule to target Christians who come to reject the doctrines of conservative evangelicalism, which is the primary supporting constituency for the Babylon Bee. The idea is to ridicule their putative ground for rejecting the belief by showing it to be self interested and self serving. Now, here's the beginning of the article that was linked to that tweet. Now, incidentally, the article was originally published in 2017. It says local Christian blogger Jonathan Pennington is being called a hero by progressive theologians after he courageously abandoned an extremely unpopular Christian teaching in order to instead affirm a very popular belief held in wider secular culture. I know this is going to be get me a lot of praise from secular culture, but I have to do it anyway because my conscience compels me, Pennington wrote on his Pathos blog. There is always a cost to following your heart, and in my case, it happens to be a net gain in terms of fame, fortune, and worldly influence. So, the claim here is that the move of theology in a progressive direction is self serving, and the rationale for doing this is, namely an appeal to conscience, is illegitimate and in bad faith. And I want to talk about that in a moment. But first, let's call out what is the biggest lie in this so-called satire. And that's namely the lie that there are no disincentives or deterrents or negative fallout that comes when a Christian rejects some Christian belief, so that it's all a net gain or benefit to embrace quote unquote secular belief. This, of course, is manifestly false. But you could believe that perhaps if you've never had skin in the game, if you've never questioned anything. On the contrary, however, those who do question quickly realize the enormous negative fallout that can come. Any congregant or employee of a Christian organization who has questioned a key doctrinal confession of that church or of the employer knows how terrifying it can be to reject that community's teaching on a topic like the age of the earth or a historical Adam or the nature of the atonement or the doctrine of hell or of election or of the Trinity or gay marriage or pacifism or abortion. The list goes on and on. Indeed, merely doubting or asking a question may bring its own degree of censure and stigma. When I was a seminary professor, I had a student who had worked for a Christian organization for 15 years. He confided his doubt in one Christian doctrine with a colleague on a Monday. His confidentiality was breached that same day, and he was fired on Tuesday. When I applied for tenure at a seminary 10 years ago, it should have taken a few months, but instead my tenure was blocked by people who didn't want me to get tenure because they didn't agree with my theology. And it took a year and a half for me to get tenure. And just so you know, having your tenure blocked means that you are fundamentally fired from your position. So I put my own position in, was in question, and I could have lost employment for a year and a half while I awaited them to adjudicate whether my soteriological views were satisfactory to some of the individuals involved in the process. That's what it means when you put out your neck and you dare to disagree with aspects of your community. That does take courage, and there is fallout that comes. Okay, let's take a look at some aspects now, a couple aspects of this fake article. The first thing I want to focus on are these phrases. So he says, the character here in the satire says, I know this is going to get me a lot of praise from secular culture and worldly influence. Now, note the underlying assumption here is that to get praise from secular culture or to get worldly influence is of itself bad or to be questioned or censured or rejected. Is that true? Go back to the 1960s. Now, and go back at that time to one of these racist segregationist churches that proliferated across the South. After the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, uh, if that church became an avowedly integrationist church and rejected its history of racism and secularism, that church would end up getting a lot of praise from secular culture and worldly influence. But it wouldn't follow that that was bad. In fact, it was good because quote unquote secular culture was in fact correct to reject racism and embrace the Civil Rights Act. And the worldly influence that came from following that that pro-social advance was in fact good worldly influence, not bad worldly influence. The problem with the mindset that creates this kind of quote unquote social critique from the Babylon Bee is that the conservative evangelical mindset assumes this is all bad, and that is underlined by a stark binary between in group and out group. The in group is light and truth and goodness and faithfulness. The out group of secular culture and the world is darkness, lies, and evil and unfaithfulness. But that's how a cult thinks. That's how they indoctrinate you. They get you to assume that every challenge to the belief and practice is from outside your specific community, and all that is in bad faith and is evil. That's how they cultivate in group conformity. Okay, now let's look at this phrase. I have to do it anyway because my conscience compels me. Again, this is presented for mockery within this so-called satire. It again assumes the appeal to conscience is in bad faith. But why? Remember, any agreement with the world or secular culture must be in bad faith, according to the binary thinking of the conservative evangelical that underlies this article. So that if you have appeal to conscience that is in line with the wider culture, then, well, of course, that must be in bad faith and it must be motivated by sin. This is erroneous, but again, that's how a cult thinks. But there's something else I want to point out here, which is that evangelicals tend to have a very truncated understanding of theological method, one in which doctrine is simply extracted from the Bible like precious gems are extracted from bedrock. But that's not how doctrine is formed. The formation of doctrine is a complex process of reflective equilibrium centered on Scripture, drawing upon multiple other sources, including conscience. Martin Luther himself famously concluded his speech at Worms by saying, "It cannot be either safe or honest for a Christian to speak against his conscience." And he's right. Your conscience can compel you. The Babylon Bee mocks the appeal to conscience because the Babylon Bee doesn't understand the role of conscience in theology, because the Babylon Bee doesn't understand how theology comes to be in the first place. The Babylon Bee and the conservative evangelicals that support the same mindset are not heirs of Orthodox Protestant theology, but rather of an aberrant American biblicist fundamentalism. And if they really want to be on point in their social critique, they should start by satirizing that.